Colonel when World War I broke out, and before it was over, he became Chief of Staff of the French Army, a national hero and savior at Verdun, and the French High Command, Philippe Petain. Born in April, the 24th of April 1856 in Chauchy-la-Tour, France. His father was a farmer and had 4 siblings, and his mother died a year after his birth, And his mother died a year after his birth. He attended school and was a promising student, where he became an when he became an adult, he took some of his money from his mother that his mother had left him, and he studied philosophy before joining military school. Although he finished 403rd out of 412 next exams, his marks drastically improved, and by 1878 he has joined the 2nd Infantry Battalion as a lieutenant, and it was pretty stagnant until World War I. Although in peace times, promotion opportunities were very rare and barely high enough to what he had become in 1916, 1917 anyway. He wanted to criticize military doctrine like group fire, all-out offensives, and marching and charging into battle like the 19th century armies, a mass suicide. And into the first few weeks of the war, the French doctrine remained. He wasn't just about defensive, but more came from an offensive with superior offense, like machine guns and semi-automatic rifles and air supremacy. Anything technologically superior. So the rise of Chief of Staff had begun 3 months after the war broke out, where he was a promising lieutenant general, and the fact that hundreds of French generals were being fired every other day made it Petain's rise. Chief of Staff began 3 months after the war broke out. He was a promising lieutenant general, and the fact that hundreds of French generals were being fired every other day made it that Petain could rise, and over the coming months became a hero. He had a signature style of leadership. He took control in Arras and strengthened the 1st and 2nd trench lines, and required more artillery, more shells, something to match the Germans. His stay at Arras was marked by strong discipline. Men caught sleeping on guard duty were court-martialed, and men stealing telephone cables were sentenced to death. But he understood to treat the men well. His supply chains were excellent, and places for sleep and washing, which weren't common, had been in his trenches under his command. But he did other offences in Arras, but he did get a victory with the French army and the Moroccan division as they took Vimy for the first time, but the Germans counter-offensive took it back. But Joffre saw enough men and Petain's method could have a breakthrough in the line, and Petain was willing to try it out, so they did at Champon, which was a disaster. 2,800 French dead and over 100,000 wounded for no real gains. Taking the first lines were easy, but the second lines were a slaughter, and Petain now favoured a war of attrition with small operations, but it didn't dissolve trust in Petain, and he was sent to hold Verdun. He set up at Souy. He set up at Souy and started to work on the War Sacré, which shipped over 90,000 men and 1,500 tons of supplies per week in and out of Verdun. He saw that the casualties were so much, he ordered that if a third of a battalion's strength was gone, he had it replaced with a new one, while the Germans just topped up their losses. Petain was in defense mode as usual, but Joffre wanted an offense, so he promoted Nivelle to do the offense. And Nivelle took over Verdun, but Petain was still a national hero, and at the time, of course, Nivelle won back Verdun, so fame was kind of short-lived. until Nivelle finished for his namesake offensive. Until Nivelle finished his namesake offensive, which was when Petain, who would become chief of staff, but Petain already had his hands full with the French. Petain already had his hands filled with the French mutinies. Nivelle's offensive had promoted an anti-war mutinies among the ranks, with many soldiers refusing to partake in another waste of life, suicidal offensive. The men were committed to defending their homeland, yes, but no more bloody offensives. It's like the one at Chemin des Dames. At the time, Petain dealt with it the old-fashioned way by executing 428 soldiers, and 2,780 were jailed, but mostly lasting up to 5 years. But he cared for his men and made relief efforts to make the soldiers' life more bearable. Leaves were more common. Guides were issued to the soldiers on leave. Barracks were made better. Food was in quality and quantity. And by July, the collapse of the French army was averted, and Petain would go to say his work stopping the French mutinies was more important than that at Verdun. He did wanted to hold back until the US could arrive in numbers, so he ordered no major offensives in 1917 and early 1918, so generals of higher command still called them too cautious and too pessimistic. So he was again sacked for Foch, but he still stuck around and gave good advice to the French command, the savior of Verdun, the French army, and the French army, but also a betrayer to his country with coexisting with the Nazis. But what would you have done if you saw the horrors of war 20 years earlier and have the pointless bloodshed with the superior Nazis? Well, not the superior, but the outnumbered Nazis. What would you have done? But it's up for debate, if you want to debate about it. Yes, he had no choice, but at the same time, he was outnumbered, and he was kind of conservative and did line up with the Nazi ideas. But this is what war had become. Les n'y passons pas. Les n'y passons pas. Les n'y passons pas. They shall not. Les n'y passons pas. They shall not pass. Foch may be the most iconic general of World War I. He did not only get the rewards from his fellow countrymen, but also those of other Entente nations such as Poland, the United Kingdom, and Serbia. But, as well, he was not perfect and had made horrible mistakes and miscalculations, causing the deaths of thousands. But his actions did play a huge part in the ending of the war in 1918. He was the myth, the legend, and the very good moustached Ferdinand Foch. Born in Toulouse in 1850, he was destined to have a military career and was an artillery officer from 1871 to 1873 at the École Polytechnique, and was an outstanding student, and had soon been accepted by the French Military Academy, where he got his doctorate, and then became a professor, and then finally the commander of the academy in 1807. And many of his lectures had been published, including his famous Des Principes de la Guerre, the Principles of War, and De la Conduite de la Guerre, the Conduct of War, and had remained in the academy until 1911, where the war really broke out in August of 1914. He was the general of the 5th French Army in the south and managed to stop the Germans' advance in August through the frontiers, and followed up with a decisive victory at the Marne and halted the Germans, and was appointed Chief of Staff of the Northern Troops and remained at that post until 1916. But his popularity dwindled with defeat in Artois and the Battle of the Somme, and after that he kind of became a scapegoat for all military blunders and political failures, and was sent to the Italian front in 1916, but he was sent back to the west and actually became a member of the Supreme War Council and became a leader for the Allied troops in France and Belgium, and attacked the Germans after their failed spring offensive and the Entente 100 Days offensive, and the German High Command knew the war was lost, and on the 11th month of the 11th day of the 11th hour, the armistice was signed. Ferdinand Foch accepted the German surrender. Foch played a huge part in the Treaty of Versailles and Paris Peace Conference in 1919. But Foch, unsuccessful in getting the military borders pushed back to the Rhine River, and the newly formed Poland gave Foch the highest medal. After that, he was promoted to field general by the British and became a councillor for the French government, and became a member of the prestigious club, the Académie Française. After many heroes and generals, he had street schools, an aircraft carrier, grapes, I believe some sort of wine, and many memorials in his name. War was part of, but he nor anyone else on the Entente or Central Power side foresaw a war quite like this. Despite his failures and mistakes, he had helped to end the war in 1918, stopped the Germans in 1914, and helped the Italians out a bit in 1916, and even predicted World War II, in a sense, by saying that this wasn't a peace, this was a ceasefire for 20 years. He died in 1929, and his bones were buried with honor in Paris cimetière. No, he was buried with honors in Paris, where his bones lie to this day. And as he said, "Toi et guerre, isli entre ons, est militimi indépendant, militi indépendant," which roughly translates to, the war is interconnected and everything is mutually independent and mutually connected. That's what it roughly translates to.